Gary, Indiana. 1958, a small industrial town where smoke poured from factory chimneys and dreams were crushed as quickly as they were born. In a tiny two-bedroom house on Jackson Street, a boy entered the world who would one day shake it to its very core. His name was Michael Joseph Jackson. Nobody could have predicted that this child, born into poverty, would become the most famous person on the planet. But fame, as Michael would learn, always demands a sacrifice. The Jackson family was large and loud. Joseph and Catherine Jackson had 9 children crammed into that little house, and money was always tight. Joseph worked in a steel mill, his hands rough and calloused, his temper short. Catherine sang around the house, her voice sweet and full of hope. She was the gentle one. Joseph was something else entirely. He saw something in his children that nobody else did. He saw dollar signs. He saw a way out of Gary, out of poverty, out of the endless grind. And he would do whatever it took to get there. Michael was just 5 years old when Joseph started drilling the children. Practice. Rehearse. Again. Harder. Faster. Better. The other kids in Gary played outside, rode bikes, scraped their knees, and came home when the streetlights flickered on. Not the Jackson children. They practiced until their fingers bled, until their voices went hoarse, until they could barely stand. Joseph stood over them with a belt in his hand. One wrong move, one misstep, one flat note, and the belt came down. Michael watched his older brothers take the hits. He learned quickly. Perfection was the only option. Anything less meant pain. The Jackson 5 was born from that fear and that discipline. Michael, barely old enough to read, became the front man. His voice was different from the others. It had a quality that made people stop and listen. Pure. Emotional. Powerful beyond his years. When he sang, something magical happened. You forgot he was just a child. You forgot everything except the sound coming from his mouth. Joseph knew it. He pushed Michael harder than the rest. This little boy was special. This little boy was their ticket. They performed anywhere that would have them. Talent shows. School gymnasiums. Dingy clubs where cigarette smoke hung thick in the air and grown men gambled and drank. Michael wore matching outfits with his brothers, spun and danced and sang his heart out. He smiled on stage, that brilliant megawatt smile that would one day be recognized across the globe. But inside, something was changing. While other children learned to play and dream and discover who they were, Michael learned only to perform. He became what people wanted to see. The real Michael, the boy who loved animals and cartoons and silly jokes, got buried deeper and deeper. In 1968, everything changed. Berry Gordy, the founder of Motown Records, saw the Jackson 5 perform. He knew immediately what he had. Within months, the family packed up and moved to California. Michael was 10 years old. His childhood, already fragile, was about to disappear completely. Los Angeles was a different world. Recording studios. Choreographers. Image consultants. The pressure multiplied. Their first single hit #1. Then another. And another. Michael became the most famous child in America practically overnight. But fame is a hungry beast. It feeds on innocence. Michael gave interviews where he smiled and said he loved performing, loved the attention, loved everything about his new life. Behind closed doors, he cried. He wanted to go to school like normal kids. He wanted friends who liked him for who he was, not because he was famous. He wanted to play. Joseph told him to stop complaining and get back to work. There were millions of dollars at stake. Michael's feelings did not matter. The show must go on. Always. Forever. No matter what. At night, Michael looked out of hotel windows at children playing below. He pressed his small hand against the cold glass and wondered what it felt like to be them. To be normal. To be free. He never found out. That window was as close as he would ever get. The boy who became a king was also a prisoner. And his cage was made of gold records and screaming fans and the relentless, crushing weight of expectations. Michael Jackson learned early that when you belong to the world, you no longer belong to yourself. By 1982, Michael Jackson had done what many thought impossible. He had successfully shed the child star label and emerged as an adult artist. But he was not content with mere success. He wanted something bigger. Something no one had ever achieved before. He wanted to create a piece of art so powerful, so undeniable, that it would transcend music itself. He wanted to make history. That album would be called Thriller. And it would change everything. Michael had always been obsessed with perfection. Every note had to be flawless. Every beat had to hit exactly right. He spent endless hours in the studio, tweaking and adjusting and redoing until it was exactly as he heard it in his mind. Producer Quincy Jones, a legend in his own right, helped shape the sound. But the vision was pure Michael. He knew what he wanted. He wanted an album that broke down every barrier. Rock, pop, funk, soul. He wanted something that everyone, regardless of race or age or background, could love. He wanted to unite the world through music. The singles came one after another like hammer blows. Each one massive. Each one inescapable. The music videos were unlike anything people had ever seen. Michael did not just make videos. He made short films. Cinematic. Dramatic. Groundbreaking. The video for Thriller itself was 14 minutes long, a mini-horror movie with dancing zombies and Vincent Price narrating. MTV, which had barely played black artists before, could not stop playing Michael Jackson. He crashed through walls that had stood for decades. He forced the world to pay attention. The numbers were staggering. Thriller became the best-selling album of all time. 8 Grammy Awards in one night. Every record broken. Every milestone shattered. Michael Jackson was no longer just a star. He was a phenomenon. A force of nature. People used the word genius when they talked about him. Some even whispered that he was superhuman. Everywhere Michael went, crowds gathered. People screamed and cried and fainted at the sight of him. He could not walk down a street. He could not go to a store. His face was everywhere. Magazines. Billboards. Television screens around the globe. But here is the thing about reaching the absolute peak. There is nowhere to go but down. Michael felt the pressure intensifying. How do you top perfection? How do you exceed the impossible? He became paranoid about his next move. Every decision felt monumental. Every choice carried the weight of the world. He stopped trusting people. Everyone wanted something from him. Money. Access. A piece of his magic. He retreated further into himself, building walls around his heart that grew thicker every day. His appearance began to change. Slowly at first, then more dramatically. His skin grew lighter. His nose became thinner. His face transformed into something different from the young man who had dominated the Thriller era. Michael gave various explanations. A skin condition called vitiligo. Necessary surgeries. Natural changes. The public did not believe him. Rumors exploded. Tabloids ran wild with speculation. Was he trying to become white? Was he ashamed of being black? The accusations hurt Michael deeply. He never stopped identifying with his heritage, but the world had made up its mind. The narrative was out of his control. He purchased the Neverland Ranch in 1987, a sprawling estate that he turned into his own private fantasy world. Amusement park rides. A zoo. A movie theater. It was the childhood he never had, reconstructed as an adult. He filled it with children, inviting sick kids and underprivileged kids to visit. He wanted to give them the joy he had been denied. He wanted to be Peter Pan, the boy who never grew up. But the world looked at a grown man surrounding himself with children and grew suspicious. The innocence Michael intended was twisted into something sinister by outsiders who did not understand. Michael Jackson stood at the top of the world, the undisputed king of pop, beloved by millions. Yet he had never felt more alone. The higher he climbed, the more isolated he became. He was trapped in a persona that the public demanded but that suffocated the real person inside. Michael wanted to be seen. Really seen. Not as a product or a brand or an icon, but as a human being with fears and dreams and vulnerabilities. That wish would never be granted. The world had decided who Michael Jackson was. And Michael Jackson, for all his power and fame and talent, could not change their minds. The crown was heavy. And it was crushing him. August 1993. The date Michael Jackson would later describe as the beginning of his nightmare. A 13-year-old boy named Jordan Chandler accused Michael of sexual abuse. The news exploded like a bomb. Within hours, it dominated every television channel, every newspaper, every conversation. The man who had been worshipped as a hero was suddenly cast as a monster. Everything changed in an instant. Michael was performing overseas when the story broke. His tour continued, but the joy was gone. At every concert, every city, the questions followed him like shadows. Reporters screamed accusations disguised as questions. Cameras hunted him relentlessly. The man who had once courted fame now ran from it in terror. He could not escape. The story grew bigger and more twisted with each passing day. People who had never met Michael claimed to know the truth. Experts analyzed him on television. Former friends sold stories to tabloids. Everyone had an opinion. Very few had facts. Michael denied the allegations vehemently. He invited investigations. He cooperated with authorities. But the damage was done. In the court of public opinion, suspicion equals guilt. It does not matter what the truth is. It only matters what people believe. And people believed the worst. Michael watched his reputation, carefully built over decades, crumble in weeks. The pain was unbearable. He had devoted his life to making people happy, to spreading joy through his art. Now those same people turned on him with vicious cruelty. The stress manifested physically. Michael had always struggled with pain, the result of years of intense dancing and a terrible accident during a commercial shoot where his hair caught fire. He relied on prescription medications to manage the pain and the anxiety. Now, under the crushing weight of the accusations, his dependency deepened. He could not sleep. He could not eat. He existed in a constant state of panic. His handlers grew worried. His family grew frightened. Michael was disappearing before their eyes. In November 1993, Michael abruptly cancelled the remainder of his tour. He checked into a rehabilitation facility for treatment of his addiction to painkillers. The tabloids had a field day. More proof, they said, that something was deeply wrong with Michael Jackson. Nobody asked if perhaps the constant harassment and destruction of his character might have driven him to this point. Nobody considered that he might be a victim too. The narrative had been set. Michael was guilty until proven innocent. And even proof of innocence would not be enough. In January 1994, Michael settled the civil lawsuit with the Chandler family for a reported $23 million. The district attorney continued the criminal investigation but ultimately did not file charges, citing lack of evidence and the refusal of the key witness to testify. Michael's supporters pointed to this as proof of his innocence. His critics said the settlement was an admission of guilt. The truth, whatever it was, became irrelevant. The damage was permanent. Michael Jackson would never be viewed the same way again. The innocence he had tried so hard to preserve in his own life was now irrevocably tainted in the public eye. Michael retreated to Neverland, heartbroken and traumatized. The man who had once filled stadiums with 100,000 screaming fans now feared leaving his home. He married Lisa Marie Presley in May 1994, the daughter of Elvis Presley, in what many speculated was an attempt to rehabilitate his image. The marriage was real to Michael, but the public dismissed it as a publicity stunt. Nothing he did could escape cynical interpretation. Every action was analyzed and judged and found wanting. The accusations changed something fundamental in Michael. The light in his eyes dimmed. The spontaneous joy that had characterized his performances became calculated and forced. He still possessed the talent. He could still dance better than anyone alive. But the magic was different now. There was a sadness underneath everything. Michael had learned the hardest lesson of fame. The same public that lifts you up will tear you down without hesitation. Love is conditional. Loyalty is temporary. And when the mob turns against you, there is nowhere to hide. The boy who became a king discovered that kings can be overthrown. And the fall from the throne is long and brutal and unforgiving. The years following the first accusations were a slow-motion collapse. Michael continued making music, continued performing, but something essential had broken inside him. The man who once controlled every aspect of his image now seemed to be losing control of everything. His behavior grew increasingly erratic. His appearance became more bizarre. The transformation was painful to witness. Michael's face had changed so dramatically that he barely resembled the young man from the Thriller era. His nose appeared to have collapsed partially from excessive surgeries. His skin was almost porcelain white. He wore heavy makeup and sometimes masks or surgical cloths over his face in public. When asked about the changes, his explanations grew more elaborate and less believable. The media mocked him relentlessly. Late-night talk show hosts made him the punchline of endless jokes. Comedians built entire routines around his appearance. Michael became a caricature, a freak show, no longer a person but a thing to be ridiculed. His financial situation deteriorated badly despite his enormous past earnings. Michael spent money compulsively. Neverland cost millions to maintain. His shopping sprees were legendary. Art. Antiques. Costumes. He bought an absurd amount of material possessions, as if surrounding himself with things could fill the emptiness inside. He took out massive loans using his music catalog as collateral. The same business acumen that had made him incredibly wealthy seemed to evaporate. Advisors came and went. Some stole from him. Others tried to help but were pushed away. Michael trusted no one and everyone. His judgment failed him repeatedly. He married again in 1996, this time to Debbie Rowe, a dermatology nurse. They had 2 children together, Prince and Paris. Later, a third child, known as Blanket, was born via surrogate. Michael adored his children. They represented the family he had always craved, the normal life that had eluded him. But even fatherhood was twisted by his fame. He covered his children's faces with masks and veils when in public, desperate to give them the privacy he never had. The images were disturbing. The world questioned his fitness as a parent. Child Protective Services investigated him. Nothing was sacred. Nothing was safe from scrutiny and judgment. In November 2002, Michael made a catastrophic error in judgment. During a documentary interview with British journalist Martin Bashir, Michael admitted that he sometimes shared his bed with children who visited Neverland, though he insisted it was innocent. He seemed genuinely confused about why anyone would find this inappropriate. To Michael, who saw himself as a child inside, it was natural and pure. To everyone else watching, it was alarming and inappropriate. Bashir's documentary painted Michael as disturbed and potentially dangerous. The backlash was immediate and devastating. Within months, police raided Neverland. Another boy, Gavin Arvizo, accused Michael of molestation. This time, criminal charges were filed. Michael was arrested, handcuffed, and processed like a common criminal. The mugshot went global. The man who had once been treated like royalty was now a defendant in a criminal trial facing decades in prison. The trial, which began in 2005, was a media circus. Every day brought new humiliating revelations and testimony. Michael, thin and fragile, attended court in pajamas one day because of back pain, creating another disturbing image that dominated news cycles. The testimony was brutal. Prosecutors portrayed Michael as a predator who used his fame and wealth to seduce children. The defense portrayed the Arvizo family as con artists seeking money. Witnesses contradicted each other. Evidence was murky. Michael maintained his innocence throughout, but the strain was visible. He lost weight. He appeared barely able to stand. His family surrounded him, offering support, but everyone could see he was hanging by a thread. This trial was not just about guilt or innocence. It was about whether Michael Jackson would survive it at all. In June 2005, the jury returned verdicts on all counts. Not guilty. Every single charge. Michael was acquitted completely. His supporters celebrated. His family wept with relief. But Michael himself seemed hollow. Yes, he had been cleared legally. But the ordeal had destroyed whatever remained of his spirit. He was free in the eyes of the law, but he was not free. He would never be free again. The accusations would follow him forever. The suspicion would never fully disappear. Michael Jackson left that courtroom a broken man. The descent was nearly complete. Michael fled America after the trial. He could not bear to stay in the country that had put him through hell. He went to Bahrain, seeking refuge with a wealthy sheikh who offered him privacy and protection. For a while, Michael simply existed, trying to recover from the trauma. But recovery was impossible. The damage went too deep. The wounds were too severe. Michael Jackson, the greatest entertainer who ever lived, had become a ghost haunting his own life. His finances were in complete ruin. Neverland went into foreclosure. The elaborate fantasy world he had built fell into disrepair. Michael could not afford to maintain it. He could barely afford anything. His music catalog, his most valuable asset, was loaded with debt. Creditors circled like vultures. Lawsuits piled up. Everyone wanted their piece of what little remained. The man who had generated billions of dollars in revenue was essentially broke. The irony was not lost on anyone. The king of pop was penniless. Attempts at a comeback sputtered and failed. Michael started recording new music but could not finish projects. He planned tours that never materialized. His health was deteriorating rapidly. Years of prescription drug abuse had ravaged his body. He suffered from insomnia, anxiety, chronic pain, and a host of other ailments. He saw numerous doctors, many of whom prescribed whatever he asked for without question. Michael was addicted to painkillers, to sedatives, to anything that would help him escape the unbearable reality of his existence. His family staged interventions. Michael agreed to get help, then continued using. The addiction had its hooks in deep. In March 2009, Michael announced a series of comeback concerts at the O2 Arena in London. 50 shows called This Is It. It would be his return to the stage, his chance to remind the world of his genius. Tickets sold out in hours. Millions of people still loved him, still believed in him, still wanted to see the magic one more time. Michael threw himself into rehearsals. At 50 years old, his body could barely keep up with the demands of his perfectionism. He pushed himself relentlessly, trying to recapture something that had been lost long ago. Behind the scenes, the situation was dire. Michael was frail and underweight. He relied on Dr. Conrad Murray, a cardiologist, to help him sleep. Murray administered propofol, a powerful anesthetic meant only for surgical settings, to knock Michael out each night. It was wildly inappropriate and incredibly dangerous. But Michael was desperate. He needed sleep. He needed rest. He needed relief from the constant noise in his head. Murray gave him what he asked for, despite knowing the risks. The money Michael paid him was too good to refuse. June 25, 2009. Michael Jackson's rented mansion in Los Angeles. Murray administered the nightly dose of propofol. But something went wrong. Michael stopped breathing. Murray, panicked and incompetent, attempted CPR but was ineffective. By the time paramedics arrived, it was too late. Michael Jackson was rushed to Oakland Medical Center. Doctors worked frantically to revive him. At 2:26 p.m., they pronounced him dead. The cause was acute propofol intoxication. Michael Jackson, age 50, was gone. The boy who became a king had paid the ultimate price. The news spread instantly across the globe. Within minutes, the internet nearly crashed from the traffic. Television stations interrupted regular programming. Radio stations played nothing but his music. People poured into the streets, crying, holding vigils, unable to process the loss. Michael Jackson was dead. It seemed impossible. He had survived so much. Surely he would survive this too. But there would be no miraculous recovery this time. The show had finally, definitively ended. The aftermath was messy and complicated, much like Michael's life. Conrad Murray was convicted of involuntary manslaughter and served 2 years in prison. Michael's estate went into probate. His 3 children were left to process an impossible grief while living under intense public scrutiny. The world mourned, but the mourning was complex. People grieved not just for the man, but for the talent lost, for the troubled soul who never found peace, for the boy who never got to be a child. Michael Jackson's legacy remains contested. Some remember only the music, the groundbreaking performances, the barrier-breaking achievements. Others cannot separate the art from the allegations, the questions that were never definitively answered. The truth is that Michael was both victim and victor, both blessed and cursed, both genius and tragedy. He wanted to be the greatest entertainer in history. He achieved that goal. But the cost was everything. His childhood. His privacy. His appearance. His reputation. His health. Ultimately, his life. The boy from Gary, Indiana, who dreamed of something bigger reached heights no one had ever reached before. But he learned what every king eventually learns. The crown is heavy. The throne is lonely. And fame, that glittering, seductive thing we all think we want, is a prison disguised as paradise. Michael Jackson became immortal through his art. But he died alone, scared, and still searching for the one thing he could never find, peace. That is the price he paid. And it was far, far too high.